You are now listening to the Take a Charge podcast, hosted by Aaron and Adam McCoy. Out from under Snowmageddon, we are back with episode 5. We're currently sitting under, I don't know, what would you say, Adam? At least 3 inches?
Well, more than that when you take into consideration all of the snow that has piled up since the last time it was below freezing. I think we're probably somewhere closer, at least in our backyard, to the 5 or 6 range.
Yeah, the place where our house sits is not. We have a lot of shade, and we have a lot of shade where we're at. So when we get snow, it stays there for a good 2 weeks past when everybody else's yard has fully melted.
Yeah, we'll be taking bets on when the snow will fully disappear from our front yard. I know it's supposed to get up to 50 in the coming week, but
it's crazy. Like it got down to like 10 degrees earlier this week.
It's been lower than that overnight.
Yeah, it's
crazy. Hopefully no icy road conditions out there, because I am supposed to, for the 4th week in a row now, be going into the office to try samples of cinnamon rolls.
Yeah, Adam has been he's been lacking on bringing home the bread, if you will. He's gotten to go into some taste testings, being with the marketing side in the bread categories. He's gotten to bring home some of the samples that he's tried, and past couple of weeks he's been supposed to go in to do these taste testings, and they've ended up getting just put online.
We have been snowed out.
Yeah, they just explain their product instead of actually getting to try it. Don't get the full experience that way.
It's still interesting, but it's really hard to just look at food and not want to eat the food.
So obviously we're all working from home, and I'll see you like on these Zoom meetings, and I hear you talking about different food. Does it ever just make you really hungry?
Oh, all the time. Sometimes it'll just make me sad to see all of these decadent loaf cakes and cinnamon rolls and peer down at my bowl of
Mini
Apple
Wheats?
Jacks or mini wheats. Yeah.
All right. So first topic we got on the docket for today is the NBA. So this week we've seen the Nets really go on a tear. So in this past week or so, they've won 5 in a row. James Harden has really found his stride. I mean, he's had his stride, but I feel like he's really coming into his own with being the facilitator with Kyrie in there. So Kyrie's been playing off the ball really well. He's been shooting the ball really well. And they've been getting so much production out of their role players. So Joe Harris, he was lighting up the Lakers the other night. TLC was lighting up the Lakers the other night. And you're getting production from guys that didn't see action at the beginning of the year. Like Tyler Johnson had 17 against the Phoenix Suns. And it's all kind of coming together for them. And then you add in the fact that they're still without Kevin Durant.
I was going to say, I think that's part of why you've seen the emergence of role players like Tyler Johnson. I don't know if he'll play as big of a role when Kevin Durant comes back, but to know that you have that weapon in your arsenal when you need it is a good thing to have.
That was definitely one of the questions early on after the Harden trade was, can they get good production out of their role guys? Because they're going to be so heavy in their starting lineup with James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant. And then you add in the kind of higher level role players that are in the starting lineup like Joe Harris. But I think with KD being out, you've kind of had to have guys step up. And I think that's where those role players have really shined. They've signed a couple guys during this kind of stretch where KD's been in and out of the lineup. You get the signing of Andre Roberson, kind of adding some defense. You get Iman Shumpert back. He was with them the last couple years. And
Has he played yet?
He hasn't played yet. He's been injured a little bit. they were evaluating him, but I don't think he was ready to come back against the Lakers. And then they also signed Noah Vonleh, and he's played a little bit here and there at the end of games, but I think they are the top contender right now to battle with the Lakers. Obviously, you still have the 76ers and Joel Embiid to worry about, but I think once Kevin Durant comes back, they'll be scary. I mean, you've seen glimpses of what they can do when they're all three of them are on the court together. I mean, we saw what they did with the Warriors. Obviously, the Warriors aren't the top of the NBA right now, but if you get James Harden scoring 20 points and getting 15 assists and getting production out of some role guys and combine that with KD and Kyrie, you're a lethal combination.
I think the bigger story, even for them, is the defense. I was really impressed. They held the Lakers under 100 points,
The
didn't they?
Lakers shot maybe 25% from three the whole game,
Yeah.
and they did not get as much production as they usually get out of their role guys.
Right.
LeBron ended up, I forget, he was over 30 for the game, but he
Some
was
crazy
really
plays
he
too.
was yeah, he was making some tough shots, and was he was I mean, he was bowling guys down low. And I think Kevin Harlan said at one point on a fast break, he was like, who in their right mind would get ahead of LeBron when he's barreling
Yeah.
down at full speed? But anyway, he was pretty much the only one that was making shots consistently. You didn't have many other guys that were stepping up, and obviously they're down Anthony Davis, and
Right.
uh, uh, Dennis Schroeder was out that game for COVID protocol. But I think that's one thing that might hinder LeBron. So NBA released their MVP ladder a couple days ago, their most recent MVP ladder, and LeBron is still number one, but you are kind of seeing that the race is getting closer because you're adding in Joel Embiid scoring 50 points last night, and he's putting up crazy numbers. You have people like Damian Lillard that are coming into the conversation. They had him at 3, and obviously he's hitting game-winning shots nearly every other night, and he's got production out of some role guys, but he's been carrying them with CJ McCollum out, and then their two bigs out. They're kind of playing a smaller lineup. But then you've got Jokic. Jokic has been killing it. And I think that race for MVP is getting a little closer for LeBron, where, I mean, obviously he's LeBron, but I think he might have to prove it a little more to uh, stretch out his lead when it comes to the MVP race.
Yeah, I think the time without Anthony Davis is going to be pretty telling.
I think if they play more games without him, that might hinder them from progressing in the West. I think they're second right now to the Jazz, who've been on fire about 10 games in a row that they've won. Do you think the Suns are legit?
What seed are they at now?
I want to say they're at the 4th seed.
Okay.
Uh, let me look it up. But what do you think about the Suns? Are they? I mean, obviously you saw what they could do in the bubble last year, and the way they've started this year, just on fire with adding Chris Paul. I think they've added a lot to their games. They added a couple role guys, but what do you think?
I was surprised that he had as much left in the tank as he did. I really don't know what I was expecting from him. He's up there in age a bit now, but to still be playing at that high level as a point guard is pretty impressive. But I think they did carry a lot of that momentum from the bubble last year into this season with them. I don't know that they're necessarily a legitimate contender for a championship or even the Western Conference Finals at this point, but I think they could make some noise in the playoffs. They saw last year, I think, that they can hang with anybody, that they can beat anybody on any given night. And I think that confidence goes a long way, especially when you talk about adding in Chris Paul to the mix. You have an experienced point guard, a veteran who can lead the types of players they have. I mean, they're a young team. If when you look at Aiton and Booker, even still, I know he's been a presence in the league for the last few years, but that's still a really young team. So While I don't necessarily see them making a run at the Western Conference Finals this year with how good the Jazz, Lakers, Nuggets, and other teams are, I do see them as a viable contender for the next several years.
So the Suns in the Western Conference goes first seed Jazz, second Lakers, third Clippers, and then the Trailblazers and the Suns have the same record at 18-10. So I think we saw a little bit of what the Suns are capable of against the Nets. They scored 75 points in the first half. And obviously wasn't at the Nets full strength. They didn't have Kyrie, they didn't have KD. But scoring 75 points in a half against anyone is impressive, and they just didn't come out strong in the second, and that's why the Nets and James Harden and the rest of the guys were able to come back on him. I think if they play like they did in the first half and make a few more shots, and Booker wasn't really on that night, I think they can be a threat in the West. I think they could hang with some teams. I agree with you. I don't think they're necessarily bound for the Western Conference Finals, but I see them having a successful second half of the season. While the Suns are hot right now, the Bucks are definitely at a low point in their season. Lost 5 in a row, most recently to the Raptors, by a hefty margin, and people are starting to wonder, is this best team in the East that we've seen the last few years really a title contender at this point? Because Giannis is not really playing at his best, and the team is just kind of half-heartedly playing a little bit. And you get guys like Thanasis Antetokounmpo, Giannis's brother, who are kind of leading the fight in terms of, I mean, he was the most spirited out there on the court against the Raptors the other night. So what do you think this means, this 5 game losing streak for them? What do you think it means for the rest of their season?
Well, I forget who was announcing the other night when we were watching that game, but at the end of the game, he made a point that it was the first time, I think with like 2 minutes left in the fourth, first time in the whole game that they had legitimately run an offensive play. And I think that says a lot. I think it's pretty much a one-dimensional team at this point.
Well, I
How
mean,
they
it's
got
either basically Giannis ISO ball or kick out for a 3. They've surrounded him with good shooters, but that's pretty much their only offense is either Giannis or a 3, and I think people are kind of collapsing on that. You saw people like Fred Van Fleet coming in and ripping the ball away from Giannis as he got to the cup. Like, they're keying in on that, and as they should, but they're taking advantage of that kind of minimal style on offense.
Well, I would say that some of the role players on their team, like the Chris Middletons, they have the ability to drive or to create their own shots. I don't think they're just 3-point shooters, but I think they have fallen into the trap of recognizing, and justifiably so, that Giannis is the best or at least the most physically gifted player on the court for them with his natural athletic ability. But you see what happens when you rely on that too heavily.
And that's especially present when Connaughton and Chris Middleton and those guys are having an off night, because they're very streaky shooters. Middleton is a streaky shooter, and when he's not on, you kind of lose some of that offense, because he's your second option. And like against I forget who it was earlier in the year, but he was hitting most of the shots he put up, and you if you don't get that production, you're losing a lot on offense for the Bucks.
Yeah, you can't go without the 3-point shot, but I do hope that they start to involve more players in their offense, because it's hard to watch a team that's that talented fail as much as they have in recent weeks.
So Last week we saw a lot of big numbers. Julius Randle's 44, Embiid's 50-point game, as well as Jamal Murray's 50-point game last night. Starting off with Julius Randle, he's kind of become the Knicks' first option right now.
Yeah, I don't know that he ever considered himself someone with the opportunity to be the guy for a franchise. I'm sure he always had confidence in himself, and he's always been a solid player wherever he's been, whether that's LA or New Orleans. But I think the chance for him to be the first option for the Knicks is something that no one really saw coming, something that no one was expecting. And it's good to see that he's been thriving in that role. I don't think the Knicks would be where they are at this point if it were not for Julius Randle. They, I think, occupy either the 6th or 7th seed in the East.
And he's come around too, with his shooting, and then specifically the last few games where they've been without Mitchell Robinson, which is one of the games he scored 44 in. I think he's kind of found that role of being that leader, and you get adding guys like Derrick Rose and Taj Gibson, some guys that are obviously Taj Gibson's been there for a couple of years, but
those guys can't escape Tom Thibodeau.
but you get those more experienced guys and those leaders that are kind of grounding a young team, and guys like Obi Toppin and Emmanuel Quickly who are quickly becoming solid players in the league, no pun intended. I think having those more experienced guys around them gives them a head start in the league, and obviously it's been beneficial for the Knicks this year as they've kind of gotten off to a better start than they have in recent years.
They have a good mix for sure, and there are teams currently in the league that could definitely benefit from a little more of that elder statesman leadership. One of which being the spotlight of our new segment on the pod.
Cavs Corner with Adam. Adam is probably not as big of a fan of the NBA as I am, but he definitely follows the Cavs. So I decided to dedicate a little bit of today's time to one of our new segments, Cavs Corner with Adam. Take it away.
It's been a tough week. The Cavaliers have lost 9 in a row. They decided to sit Andre Drummond, who was probably my favorite player to watch from the Cavaliers, in hopes of trading him. And while Jared Allen has proven to be a pretty formidable presence underneath, and you obviously have a great young core in Sexton and Garland, they still seem like they're missing the veteran pieces to put it all together. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about with the Suns or with the Knicks, where they have a good mix of veterans and young guys. And the Cavs just don't have that. I think probably the most senior player on the Cavs, and at least the longest tenured, would be Kevin Love. And he's been out for most of the season. So
I definitely think they're missing Love and Nance and the production that they give. Not necessarily scoring at times, but just having their presence on the court, I think grounds them a little bit with having that young group of players. I think they miss that a little bit.
Yeah, it's tough for them to really keep their heads in it, I think, when they're down by 10 or so after the first quarter. That's not an insurmountable deficit, but if you have a lot of young players in there who aren't used to coming back in games like that, the game can get away from you very quickly.
Well, thank you, Adam. I appreciate the update on the Cavaliers, and I'm sure that our listeners appreciate the update on the Cavs. So, quick All-Star update before we move on from NBA news. March 7th in Atlanta, they're gonna do the Taco Bell skills challenge before the game, and then 3-point contest after that. And then following the 3-point contest, they're going to start the All-Star game. And then during halftime, they're going to do the dunk contest. What's your thoughts on doing this all in one night, and then two, doing the dunk contest at halftime?
I think having it all in one night is probably the best option in terms of limited exposure, not leaving people in Atlanta for a super long time. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. I still think it's going to create some tension between owners and Adam Silver and the rest of the league and the players, because it's something that many have expressed they don't want. But I'll be interested to see how it goes. I think there have been a couple people who have already committed to being in the dunk contest or being in the skills challenges. And I'm excited to see what happens. I think one of the players who already committed to being in the 3-point contest is Damian Lillard.
Hmm.
And I, for one, think that it's a snub that he is not an all-star starter. I understand that Luka's had a good season, but at a certain point, there has to be some consideration for the team that you're on.
I would say that Dame has had to carry his team more now that he's gotten kind of dealt a bad hand with the other injuries that the Trailblazers have had.
I think at the stage of his career he's at, though, he knows how to better use the pieces around him, regardless of who's healthy that night, than what Luka does at this point. I feel like the temptation for a young player like Luka is to carry the weight all on your own, where Damian Lillard really allows other players to shine, whether that's veterans like Carmelo, whether that's people who are new to the league that aren't as experienced, or even role players that are now having to fill more minutes. I think that he is experienced enough, has been in the league long enough that he has the wherewithal to be able to use those players to their greatest advantage. And that's a skill that Luka is still developing.
So they announced the All-Star starters on Thursday, I think it was, on NBA on TNT. For the West, we got LeBron, Steph, Luka, Jokic, and Kawhi, which I had. And then for the East, for the guards, I had Beal and Harden. And I think Harden's had a better year overall, but it's a popularity contest, so it ended up being Beal and Kyrie. And then the forward spots, you had KD, Giannis, and Embiid. So I was only one off, but that's who I voted for. Moving on from the All-Star game and NBA news, we got some updates for the Reds. Adam and I are huge Reds fans, have been for most of our lives, and pitchers and catchers reported to spring training this week, and kind of one step closer to maybe having a good year. What do you think?
Well, the rotation remains the biggest question mark for me. I know everyone's concerned about the shortstop situation. I think platooning Garcia and Kyle Farmer will work out fine for them.
And they signed D. Gordon.
Yeah, I mean, he's batted under 220 the last like 5 years, but I'm hopeful that he'll be able to provide a spark there too. If nothing else, at least a little bit of the Billy Hamilton effect that they had a few years ago. But I think the rotation's the bigger question. You have a great top half, at least the top 2/5 with Luis Castillo and Sonny Gray. I think Wade Miley's a little bit of a question mark, but he does have a track record in non-injury laden seasons of being a reliable piece.
You got DeSclafani too.
No, he went to the Giants.
Oh, really?
Yep, he was signed away. Yeah, so the back end of your rotation, like I said, Wade Miley's a bit of a question mark. Tyler Malley's pretty much a lock for that fourth starter, and he really has not proven himself yet. He's pretty much been a below average pitcher for his career. I'm hoping he can take that next step. And then the fifth spot, we'll have to see what happens. But right now, it's looking like it'll probably be Michael Lorenzen making his return to the starting rotation. I know he started a few games last year, but making his return to the starting rotation full time. So, what do you think of that rotation, Aaron?
I think it's solid. Do you think they should have done a little more work on the rotation, at least the bottom half, considering that they knew Trevor Bauer was not going to come back?
I think they're playing a bit of a long game. I'm still not entirely convinced that their GM knows what he's doing, but I think they started out the offseason with the understanding of, okay, we're probably not going to have fans, or at least we're not going to be at full capacity for this coming season, which means we're not going to get the dollars from ticket revenue or from concessions or from any of the other things that occur physically at Great American Ballpark with these games. So they knew they were a little bit financially handicapped. They knew that the season probably ultimately didn't mean as much to the average fan since there wasn't that opportunity to be in person and since there's a potential of it being condensed in some way. So I think they were looking to maybe do a bit of a mini rebuild. You saw in the offseason, they weren't trying to acquire pitchers. I mean, they made Trevor Bauer a qualifying offer that he pretty much laughed at and threw in the trash. But they were shopping Sonny Gray and Luis Castillo for most of the offseason. So I really can't imagine what their rotation would have looked like if they had been able to shop both of those guys for prospects. I don't know how you fill out the rotation without those guys. But yeah, I think their goal was entirely in the opposite direction where they wanted to do sort of a mini rebuild, get some prospects in there to pair up with their veterans like Musakis and Castellanos. But the result was kind of mixed. But I think they'll have a chance. I think they could have done more. I think they should have done more. But I think at the end of the day, the fact that they weren't able to trade Castillo or Sonny Gray will benefit them in the long run.
I'd like to see Michael Lorenzen fill one of those spots. I mean, you and I are big on Lorenzen. We like Lorenzen. Kind of had a down year the first half of last year. He kind of started to come alive in the fall. Um, Overall, though, I don't think it was his best stuff. I'd like to see him get more on top of it. I think one big thing for me, I was not a fan of the universal DH that the MLB implemented for last year, and obviously it was a weird year, but that just meant Michael Lorenzen couldn't fulfill the dream of being the two-way player of pitching and being hitter and playing in the outfield. I think he played center field a couple times, but I don't think he batted. If I remember, he came in to pinch run a little bit, but I'd like to see him fill that last spot and maybe get a chance to bat if he can dial it up on his pitching. He was trying to, I think, a lot go for speed last year, lost some control, gave up a lot of runs, but I don't know. I'm interested to see how he works on last season.
Yeah, and I'm glad in a broader context that the universal DH isn't continuing. I know that it benefited certain players like Jesse Winker, who maybe aren't good enough to hold an everyday outfield spot, but could bat every day. But I think it's one of the nuances that helps make the game what it is. One last bit of Reds conversation I'd like to get to before we move on is the catcher position. I mentioned I wasn't overly concerned about shortstop. The platoon situation seems okay for me for now there. The catcher position I see creating a lot more tension as the season goes on. You saw last year the beginning of a platoon situation with Kurt Casale and Tucker Barnhart, which worked okay for what it was. But Kurt Casale is gone now too. one of my bold predictions for the Reds for this season is that by the end of the season, you will see Tyler Stevenson as the everyday starting catcher, and that this will be Tucker Barnhart's last year with the Reds.
I got one more question on the Reds for you. What's the deal with Hunter Green? I know, I mean, people were hot on him when he first came to the organization and ended up getting injured pretty early in his development, and then kind of had a down year in the minors or development league or whatever they had last year in place of the minor leagues. What what's going on with him, and where do you think, if at all, he will fit this year?
So I don't think he played at all last season because they didn't have any minor leagues, and the only teams that did have things going on were teams like the Florence Freedom, Lexington Legends, and he was at such a low level in the minors that I don't think he made it onto the development squad that practiced out at Prasco Park. He, I think, made it to high A ball, which is Dayton, before getting injured 2 seasons ago. So he's now been out for the better part of 2 seasons. He did, I saw the other day, get a spring training invite, though, which means he'll be there in Goodyear. And I hope that he has a solid performance. I know that they probably won't send him out there in high pressure situations, but it should be good for his development. There is going to be a condensed minor league season this year, so I hope that's beneficial for him. I don't see him factoring into the Reds' 2021 major league season, but given the state of the rotation with the bottom half being largely unproven, as I've said, and the upper half probably nearing contract, and by the time Hunter Green matures to the point of joining the big league team, I think he needs to be a point of focus for the organization. And I don't think you can just let someone like that, especially with how much money they're paying him as a former number one draft pick for them. I don't think you can just let someone like that slip through the cracks because of gaps in development due to injury or due to COVID.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see his development going forward. Uh, I'm just really excited for MLB The Show. I've said it once, I'll say it again. I'm excited to be able to play that again. All right, a couple things non-sports related. You and I and our mom started watching WandaVision this week, and we were kind of hesitant on it. We were like, it looks kind of weird. We like Marvel stuff, but it just kind of looked kind of off. All the sitcom references, like old school TV shows that they've referenced, but it's getting interesting. It's definitely a weirder show. I mean, it's cool.
Yeah, no spoilers in this segment for those concerned, but I agree with you. I think the theming is probably the most interesting part for me going back to those older shows. And I think the trailers were probably a bit intentionally ambiguous in that regard, where they were really just showing a whole lot of nothing. But the theming was enough to pique the interest of some people. I think there is a little bit of that sci-fi Stranger Things type of element to it, at least in recent episodes, that's made it more interesting than it maybe was in the first couple episodes. I think it's one that took a little bit to get into. As someone who appreciates the older TV shows, particularly Andy Griffith, our dad was a big fan of, I enjoyed seeing the old sitcom style for what it was, but the episodes themselves weren't necessarily full of a whole lot of content. So it was good to see for those who are considering whether or not they should watch it and maybe have made it through one or two episodes and have Disney Plus. I would encourage those folks to stick it out and give it at least through episode 3 or 4 for things to start getting really interesting.
Second, on the topic of movies and TV, Have you watched the Justice League Snyder Cut trailer yet?
I have not, but I'd love for you to give me the highlights.
It's interesting. I think it's going to be a lot darker than what I think it was 2017 when the first Justice League came out. I think it's going to be a lot darker than that version. There were a lot of new shots in the trailer that we didn't see in the first one. I'm just very confused as to the direction that all the DC Comics movies are going. I don't think we didn't see the new Wonder Woman that came out. I've heard it was okay, but there's so many different DC movies or universes out there right now cuz you have I feel like the main one you have is the Justice League like grouping because you have like the Aquaman movie, you have the Man of Steel movies, Wonder Woman, and then Ben Affleck as Batman. But like he is out of that role from what I hear. Like he's not gonna be playing Batman in any other movies. So that kind of is confusing to me. And then obviously they're making the standalone Batman movie with Robert Pattinson, and that's like I don't think it's set in the same universe as like Ben Affleck's Batman. Um, and I'd kind of put that in the same line as like the Joker. The Joker's not in anywhere Joaquin Phoenix, his Joker's not anywhere related to Ben Affleck's Batman. And then you've got a couple like spin-off movies with like Harley Quinn and stuff. I think that's still in the same as like the Justice League universe, but it's just there's a lot of things going on at the same time.
Yeah, as a marketing person, it hurts me a little bit because I feel like the potential is there to have something similar to what the MCU has. I mean, the writing maybe is not quite as good, but you still have the same level of characters in the DC universe. But I just see the branding as lacking so much consistency, and it's really difficult for the fans to follow
We watched Agents of Shield
for
for
a
like
couple
maybe
seasons.
like
Yeah.
the first two seasons. It was an offshoot of the movies from the Avengers, but it was still set in the same universe and there were still like references to the movies. And I've always been a bigger fan of the Justice League and like the DC superheroes, I think, more than uh, the Avengers and the Marvel superheroes. But with that being said, and it's probably because of Disney, Marvel has just had a much better run in terms of writing, in terms of marketing and content that they've produced. And there's just not a lot of direction that like Warner Brothers has on the DC universe. And I think obviously you could make good stuff. And I think the Snyder cut of Justice League is going to be a great movie, and I hope it is because people's expectations are through the roof and have been for 2-3 years at this point. But I think that's one way that DC has failed or Warner Brothers has failed, and just like they've got so many different things going on at the same time that it takes away from whatever main story they're trying to tell, and they don't have one coherent story that they're trying to tell at this point.
Yeah, and to Marvel slash Disney's credit, to the ability to get the same actors generally for over a decade for these movies is kind of unheard of. I mean, you even saw with super long running franchises like the James Bond movies. I've not watched a ton of them, but from what I understand, the actor turnover happens pretty quickly. You're lucky to get two movies out of the same James Bond, which I think they got two or three out of Daniel Craig, but they got so many movies for the MCU that had the consistency of Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth. It was just unheard of in modern cinema, and I think that's a big testament to why they, for the large part, have been somewhat more successful than the DC universe.
So the Justice League Snyder Cut's coming out on HBO Max. We currently do not have HBO Max. I am probably gonna push for a for a free trial when that comes out or something, because they've got a lot of cool stuff on there. I know Space Jam 2 with LeBron is coming out sometime this summer, I think. So I'm looking forward to that, but we'll see. There's a lot of streaming services. We've been able to watch a lot of them, shows that they created or that they produced and that kind of stuff. So I think it's interesting to see how they have influenced other streaming services to start doing their own content rather than just carrying previously made or big time TV shows or movies.
Yeah, I could be wrong on this because I'm not a TV expert by any means. I don't know that I'm keeping up with what's winning Oscars or Golden Globes or Emmys or what have you. But I really feel like Stranger Things was what catapulted them into reputability from that standpoint. Like I know they had other content that they produced prior to that, like House of Cards and other ones.
Yeah, I
But
feel like House of Cards was probably more of a niche audience. Like you don't see 15-year-old girls watching House of Cards. You get everyone watching Stranger Things. You
right,
get they appeal to so many different markets in Stranger Things because obviously they appeal to people that grew up in the 80s
yeah,
and things like that. You get like callbacks to that era, and then you get having kids as your main characters. Like
right,
you get that crowd, and then you get everyone in between there. So
yeah. It's sci-fi without being too over the top scary, and I think that appeals to a lot of people. I'm excited for whenever the next season of that comes
I
out.
think they're filming right now. So
Yeah,
hopefully
that in
sometime soon.
Atlanta. Looking forward to it. Big things
Atlanta,
coming.
yeah, I saw yesterday they're filming seasons 3 and 4 back to back, or they're supposed to start in March, and then I don't know when they're supposed to come out, but I am also excited for Atlanta. You got anything before we go close this episode out?
Just excited for another great week. Excited for the snow to start melting away. I know Puxatawny Phil predicted 6 more weeks. We're maybe going to be halfway through that by the time you listen to this, but it seems like spring's on the horizon. And as pretty as the snow is coming down, it's a little bit of a hassle once it's here. So I'm looking forward to spring. Looking forward to maybe for our loyal listeners who have already heard last week's podcast and know my affinity for Ponderosa. Looking forward to maybe making a meal out of those frozen wings you heard about on the last episode. What about you?
Wednesday, I have Heidelberg does this thing every couple months that they call it a hype day, and they bring in a guest.
HEIP, correct?
No,
Oh, okay. Misbranding opportunity.
they bring in a guest speaker. So they've had comedians, former athletes, different like motivational speakers come in and almost give like a TED talk type thing. And then after that, you kind of do like breakout sessions and things like that. Or like one of them was intro to handshake or creating your first resume. And then you have other ones where you'll watch a movie and analyze the movie. And this one, coming up on Wednesday, they bring in Kal Penn, who is an actor. He was in like the Harold and Kumar movies, and he was in Designated Survivor. I think he was on the public relations side for the White House in like 2009. So he's been in both like the political field and the acting field. So it'll be interesting to see him. He's a pretty interesting guy. And then like the breakout session I'm doing is a Zoom Q&A with him. Obviously, he's not going to be there in person. So I'm able to be there and hopefully get to ask him a question or two and listen to what he has to say. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's exciting stuff. I can't wait to hear.
Thank you guys for listening to another episode of Take a Charge. Be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Spotify so you can hear all our episodes. Let us know what you think and let us know what topics you want us to cover in future episodes as we give you our take on sports, pop culture, and more.
You need to stay up out the streets if you can't take the heat. You need to stay up out the streets if you can't take the heat. Cause it get cold like Minnesota. Cold like Minnesota. Cold like Minnesota. Cold like Minnesota.